Washington correspondent, and he's in the newsroom, and he has a special guest who we don't want to keep waiting forever. Hi, Olivier.
Thanks, Katie. Thanks very much. Well, if you watch too much cable TV during an election, you're going to think that everybody's title is Democratic strategist or Republican strategist, and it's often meaningless. But our next guest actually earned the title. Mitch Stewart ran the battleground state operation for President Obama's 2012 re-election campaign and co-founded the campaign consulting group 270 Strategies. He knows what he's talking about. Thanks for joining us.
Of course. Thank you.
So you heard the report from my colleague Biana. You're seeing the red spread across the map. Yeah. Do Democrats need to put away the champagne and reach for the harder stuff?
Well, not yet. Not yet. But I think what you are seeing is a map that's almost closer to like a 2004 than it was a 2008 or 12. I remember in 2012, like Michigan and Minnesota, as soon as the polls closed, they were called or called very shortly thereafter. And in this instance, they're still out. No, so is Georgia, which, for us was called very early against us. But a host of other states that are all sort of in the Democratic coalition from 2008 and 12 are still out. And so, I think a lot of us, myself included, might have been a little bit overly optimistic and hopeful about how tonight would work out. But it's going to be a long night. And I don't think the fundamentals of what we're seeing right now are all that much out of line with what the polls would have predicted at the beginning.
So you alluded to something I want to get into, which is how has the map changed between 2012 and 2016, the battleground states? How have they changed?
Yeah, it's really interesting. And so I think as you follow the migration patterns within the U.S., specifically some of the non-white communities that you're seeing in the South and to the West, and then also these states that have relatively little diversity and high white populations, and specifically high white non-college educated populations, and you're seeing a bit of a sea change. And so the Midwestern sort of industrial states, Michigan, Ohio, Iowa to a certain extent, and then potentially Wisconsin, they're becoming more and more Republican. Pennsylvania a little bit as in addition to that. But, the inverse of that is also true. So states like North Carolina, Georgia, hopefully Florida, but then also in the West, Arizona, are performing better, or at least you see glimpses of them performing better. And so I think those are the migration patterns that you're seeing, and it is a bit of a reshuffling.
So what would you tell a Democratic presidential candidate eyeing 2020?
Yeah, well, I think Georgia and Arizona are fantastic opportunities. And they're expensive states because they're big, especially Georgia. I mean, Georgia's as big as North Carolina. And so if you really want to be competitive there, we're talking about $30 or $40 million to do that. But it really opens up a lot more pathways to 270. And we need to continue to evolve as a party. If we're just going to focus on the same 10 to 12 states, there's not going to be a lot of room for growth. We're going to be stagnant as a party.
Do you think that tonight's results reflect what we've been hearing for a while now, which is this Latino voter surge? Well,
I hope so. Fingers crossed. What's interesting, the very first race I worked in 2002, I was in South Dakota, and George W. Bush came out 5 times to a state with 400,000 voters. And it was a very conservative state. He won by 21 points, I think, in 2000. And the county that brought him over the top was Shannon County, which is the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. That county, and it was the poorest county in the country, was a county that basically told the leader of the free world, no thank you, we're going to go with, at that point, Senator Tim Johnson. And what I hope happens in Florida is that this Latino surge that we've all been hearing about is sort of the missing link in a place like Broward County, where we're still seeing a lot of outstanding ballots, and that puts Hillary Clinton over the top. So I think it's too early to see how the Hispanic vote in Florida behaves compared to how the Hispanic vote in a place like Texas, Arizona, Nevada, or Colorado. But ultimately, that's where this is going. The Democratic coalition is a coalition of non-whites and of college-educated white voters. That's basically who we are.
So one of the big conversations throughout this race has been the non-college educated white voters. Yeah. Do Democrats need to win those voters back? If so, how do they do it?
Well, we don't have to win a majority of them back, but we can't get beaten badly. And some of the results that we're seeing now is that we're underperforming by a large margin what we did in 2012. And so I don't think we'll ever win that cohort back. And frankly, we don't need to. I think some of the language and the rhetoric that Donald Trump used to appeal to sort of the worst nature of our voters is not something that Democrats want to do. But we can't afford to take a massive beating, which is what we're kind of seeing right now.
So you're a metrics guy, you're a math guy, but I'm going to ask you to speculate a little bit here,
okay.
Because one of the panel members, Katie, actually brought this up. What There's been talk among Republicans that any other Republican would have beaten Hillary Clinton. Now, we don't know the outcome of tonight's race, but let's think about one very specific kind of other Republican. Try to picture a disciplined Donald Trump who sticks to the core message of, the elites have betrayed you and I will turn this around. Would that kind of candidate have beaten Hillary Clinton?
It would be a very appealing candidate. And so a disciplined Donald Trump, the language that he used, I think the policies that he has are still disqualifying to a number of voters. And so maybe the inverse of that would be like a harder Marco Rubio. Somebody who has a relatively pleasant demeanor, who comes across in sort of a polite, professional manner, but has a bit of an edge to him. That would be a tough candidate to beat.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing that Donald Trump is doing very, very well. You talk about disqualifying language, but he's doing surprisingly well for a candidate described that way by a lot of Democrats.
Yeah, well, so the demographics right now, in 2012, about 28% of the population was non-white, or 28% of the voting population. In 2016, it's probably going to be 30 or 31%, depending on how you want to look at it. And so this country is changing. And I think the damage that Donald Trump has done for the Republican Party to the fastest growing segment of our country, Latino voters, is going to last a generation. And that's not something that's just going to be washed away in the next 4 years. And that's going to continue to haunt them every presidential election from this point forward. And in about 30 years, we're going to be a majority-minority country. This Republican nominee has disqualified the Republican brand to a big chunk of those voters.
You were always skeptical of Democratic chances to retake the House. It's a tall order, roughly 30 seats to take. What's it going to take to retake the House for Democrats?
Well, I'm a big believer in electoral reform and redistricting, and I think as long as the maps are drawn as they are right now, it's going to be impossible for Democrats to retake the House. And so I think what we need to focus on, and I'm proud to be part of an effort to do this, is to focus on redistricting. And so winning back some of these state House or state Senate chambers, winning some of these governor's offices, winning some of these Secretary of State offices so that we can get fair maps. That's the only way that we'll be able to retake the House. I mean, in 2012, we had a lot more votes for Democratic House members than Republican House members, even though they have a 30-vote or 30-member lead. So that has to be done with the maps. It has to be done with the maps.
All right, Mitch Stewart, thank you very much.
Of course, thank you.
And we'll get back to you, Katie, in the studio.
All right. Thank you very much, Olivier. So we're back kind of trying to digest all these returns that are coming in, and Jamal Simmons is back. And I know you've been talking to some Clinton folks, and tell us what they're